Hello, my name is Paris McGorman, and I'll be presenting alongside Emma Fox and Laura Walls. Point Pleasant Park is a recreational forested area on the southern tip of Halifax, Nova Scotia. It is important to note that this land was colonized by Europeans when they arrived in 1749 and was traditionally known by the Mi'kmaq as Emnutikadi, meaning the place of spirits. This area is and was very significant as a place where Mi'kmaq people would gather for 7 days after the full moon in spring. Following the colonization of this land, many trees were cleared for settlement and military purposes. In 1866, the land was officially made a park intended for recreational use, and so the forest was able to regrow into the Acadian forest type that had been there prior to being cleared. It is important to note that because the regeneration began at the same time, the forest was even-aged, making an even-age Acadian forest. The soil within the park has also been reported to be quite shallow due to glacial movements that wash away sediments as they melted. This shallow soil and even age growth are contributors to how Hurricane Juan caused so much destruction to the park when it hit Halifax in 2003. The hurricane devastated 70% of the tree canopy in the park, destroying approximately 70,000 trees. Following the hurricane, efforts were made to preserve the young forest growth and to remove much of the dead and damaged trees. These restoration efforts took 9 months, and as of now, the forest has been able to grow for 19 years. So, we're able to observe what secondary succession has looked like in this Acadian forest, analyzing how the overall community, density of the dominant species, and species richness have changed over time. We'll also be predicting how these factors will change as the forest moves towards its climax community.
In each study site, all the living trees that were equal to or greater than 2.5 centimeters in diameter at breast height were identified and measured. Sites were chosen for variation and accessibility. The sites are next to park trails so that they were easy to access. To add, some sites are closer to the water while others are more inland. This allowed for compensation of the possible variation in tree species depending on location. These measurements gave us an estimate of the amount of wood in a stand of trees. This technique is commonly used by the logging industry, so by using the industry standard, it allowed the results to be able to be compared easily to industry data. The linear regression model is used to predict the value of a variable based on the value of another variable. For this study, we compared 6 to 7 variables against time to create our linear regression. The overall forest community has changed drastically over time since Hurricane Juan. Diversity has been a key factor in this. The species of trees in Point Pleasant Park have become more diverse since Hurricane Juan. The time has allowed for the species who need longer to mature. To add, it is predicted that as the forest community moves towards its climax community, the diversity of the forest will eventually plateau. The regression analysis shows a significant p-value of 1.6 times 10 to the negative 8th. This indicates that there is a positive correlation between Shannon Diversity Index and time. This means that over the years from 2004 to 2023, there was an increase in tree species diversity in Point Pleasant Park.
Red spruce was the dominant species in the park in 2004. While population numbers have significantly grown since then, with a p-value of 0.002, the density of red maple has surpassed the density of red spruce significantly with a p-value of 0.0001 in Point Pleasant Park since 2004. The longevity of a red spruce tree is about 400 years, while the longevity of a red maple tree is about 150 years. Because red spruce trees have a slower growth rate, this may be a reason why red maple has surpassed the density of red spruce. As the forest reaches its climax community, red spruce may become the more dominant species once more, or at least be comparable.
A linear regression analysis was completed in order to examine the change in species richness over time following Hurricane Juan, analyzing data measured from 2004 until the present year, 2023. Species richness is a measure of the number of species within an area. It can be observed from Figure 4 that there is a positive linear increase of species richness across time. The R-squared value is found to be 0.6418, which is greater than 60% and indicates there's a strong relationship between species richness and time. The p-value is also significant, meaning we can reject the null hypothesis, indicating that there is a significant positive relationship between species richness in Point Pleasant Park over time and years. The reasoning for this increase in species richness, which has occurred, can be explained by the patterns typical of secondary succession. As explained within Maria Turchin's report, the first species to reestablish following a disturbance typically cannot tolerate shade and has shorter lifespans and very effective dispersal. This makes sense, as in the beginning there are only those shade-intolerant trees, and then as the forest continues to grow over time, more long-lived species will reestablish themselves. So we can visualize the increase in species richness as it becomes an aged Acadian forest once again, with a greater number of species. Looking forward, we can predict that the species richness will continue on this positive trend, slowing and eventually leveling off when the community climax is reached, likely due to some limitation.
Point Pleasant Park contains indigenous biodiversity that is important for conservation in urban landscapes like Halifax. Urban parks allow city dwellers to experience and appreciate native species and what a healthy ecosystem looks like. Maintaining the health and biodiversity of urban parks is dependent on management by the city, and because of the isolation of the area, it makes the disturbance from hurricanes more impactful, such as in cases like the disruption of Point Pleasant Park by Hurricane Juan. There are many things that can affect succession as an urban park. One thing is heavy use of the park by the public, which can disturb natural growth patterns. Compaction of the soil by foot traffic can cause reduction of root space and air in the soil. It can hinder plant growth and increase erosion. Another thing that can affect forest succession in Point Pleasant Park is that it is heavily fragmented by the large pathways and walkways that move through the park. For example, a report written by Jim Jotham in 1985 showed evidence of erosion of soil surrounding the pathways due to storm runoff. Based on trends in the data, such as the Shannon Diversity Index, which is still increasing as of 2023, we can see that the forest has not yet reached its climax community and is potentially still in its young forest phase. As the forest reaches succession, we will likely see more growth of shade-tolerant trees and trees with longer lifespans, such as the red spruce. Indigenous people make up 4 to 5% of the world's population, but maintain up to 85% of the world's protected areas. So we need to take their teachings into account. Practices that we can implement when using the park are to remember that all things are connected, be mindful of stepping on flora and fauna in the forest, and try to stay on designated walking paths. Respect the space and never leave debris or garbage. Try to leave it the way you found it. And take moments of gratitude. Pause and take a deep breath and appreciate that we have a forest to explore so close to home. We would like to acknowledge all of the Dalhousie students and professors before us that have done extensive research and documentation of the changes in Point Pleasant Park over the years. We would also like to thank the Mi'kmaq community who actively contribute to conservation efforts in Nova Scotia and previously used Point Pleasant Park as a spiritual and ceremonial space.